Alright, so I'm currently in the midst of a piston ring soak on this 2013 Chevy Malibu with the 2.5 liter. And basically what goes into a piston soak is you take the spark plug coils out. Simple, they're 10 millimeter little bolts. Here's what they look like. They're down there like that. Pop them out. You of course unplug the connector. You can see the connector goes right there. Some of the connectors actually can be a little tricky. A couple of them I broke the little tab off, but it doesn't really matter. This one has a broken tab, so all you do is push this down and it slides off. I'll show you one that has a broken tab as well. This one has the tab still there. I'm colorblind, but it looks red to me. But you have to basically pop that back, and it's not easy actually to pop back. That's how it can be easy to break them. You got to pop that back. I think that's actually back already. Try to push it forward. It doesn't want to go forward right now. But when you push it back, you can then push down and then get these out. I think this one has a tab as well. Yeah. See, they both do. It doesn't matter that the other ones are broken. It'll still click on. It's just a little easier to get off. It's probably actually better that they're broken. So you get them out, get the coils out, unplug them, take the spark plugs out. Do it with the engine cold. You don't want to do it with a hot engine, or else they could season there, and then you're stuck with a whole different issue. So just make sure the car is cold when you do this. Got the spark plugs out. They didn't look super terrible. A little dark on the top, a little crusty. The little iridium ground in the middle is okay, and there's still the platinum on the other ground. You can kind of see it at the top on the electrode. Still see it's kind of there, but I measured them, and they are a couple thousandths wider than these, and these are the new ones I got. I thought they're pretty cool. They're actually, I got a pair of iridiums like this for my stepson's car. They're iridium TTs. They look exactly like this. They didn't have iridium TTs for the Chevy. Instead, what they had was these ruthenium HXs. But it's the same, well, it's a similar principle. I think it's actually a harder and the most durable and the best spark producing element. So I had to pay like $8 a piece for them at Rock Auto, but I'm going to install these when this is all said and done. Yeah, but then what I do to do the piston soak is I'm using this Marvel mystery oil, and it's 32 ounces. The reason I'm using this as opposed to what I used in my last piston ring soak on my stepson Scion, I used something called gum out there, and I think gum out's probably pretty similar to seafoam. The bottle looks almost exactly the same. It's one of those, like, you know, kind of like tin aluminum looking bottles. You probably know what a seafoam bottle looks like, but that actually worked wonders when I did the soak with his car, and maybe I should have used that here. His car went from burning like a quart of oil every 800 miles or so, and so far in over double that mileage, like over probably 1,600 miles, he hasn't even burned a quart yet. So I would call that pretty successful. And I've tried so many things in these cars so far to get it to burn oil, but never approaching the piston from the top. I think that's actually what's needed to clean these rings. I think the rings get carbon on them, probably both the compression rings, they get stuck, and also the oil control rings that are kind of below them further down towards the crankcase. And those oil control rings are what's supposed to scrape the side of the cylinder walls, scrape it of oil, and return that oil through the piston, through these little holes, and down through the piston and back into the crankcase. But if those holes are clogged, or if the oil control rings are clogged, it's not going to be able to return any oil. That oil is going to burn, and that's why you're going to lose oil. So I think that's actually what's going on in these cars. The oil control rings were all gummed up. Now, like I said, I maybe could have and maybe should have used the gum out again or something like that instead of using the Marvel Mystery oil. We'll see how this goes. But I was actually able to use more of this because this comes in a 32 ounce container, so basically a quart, whereas the gum out or seafoam, they come in like 16-ounce containers. And yeah, you can get two, but I figure some people have used this with success, so it's worth a shot. And another thing is, I'm still in the middle of a oil change interval, so it's not like I'm changing the oil of this tomorrow. It still has probably 2,000 miles to go. I change it every like 3,000 because this is like a GDI engine, direct injection. They're so sooty, they get so dirty. My wife does a lot of stop and go driving, sometimes short drives where the car's not warming up, so that oil gets run through quick when you're not getting up to temp, and it's just not wearing the best. And like I said, these GDI engines are sooty, so I feel like you got to do oil changes a little quicker. But anyhow, I'm only like 1,000 or 1,500 miles into this oil interval, so I'm just going to leave this oil in. And that's one of the advantages of the Marvel Mystery, is you can actually replace like 20% of your oil with this. So this takes 5 quarts. I was actually getting to the point where I probably had to add about a quart anyway, because I went about 1,000 miles, and this one still kind of burns, about a quart of oil every, hard to say, maybe every 1,800 miles, something like this. And this was due for a quart of oil, so I can use this, even though a lot of this, when you do this piston ring soak, it's gonna seep through the piston rings, down past the piston and into the crankcase. So it's okay for it to be down there. Once it seeps through, it can mix with the oil, and I can finish up the oil change interval with this in there. And maybe this stuff will actually help clean the bottom of the piston ring holes, from the underside. Honestly, I've never had a ton of experience with that, or not a ton of experience. I've had actually a ton of experience, but never good experience. I've used all kinds of products in the crankcase to try to help with this issue. I've done engine flushes, or like oil flushes, however you want to call it, before I change the oil, which is basically, I think it's more or less pouring like a bottle of kerosene in there. That's, I think it's a Motor Medic product or something like that, but you dump that, like a quart of that in, get the car up to temperature. Don't, go above idle. Let it get hot, and then you change the oil, and that kind of flushes a lot of the crud out. That didn't help. I ran something called BGEPR inside of the crankcase with the oil for like a whole oil change interval, which you're supposed to do, and that stuff's supposed to slowly clean basically everything in there, and possibly the control rings. But I didn't have a good experience with that. I put it in both cars. It didn't really help. So I think the only issue, or the only thing that's going to fix the oil burning issue, is to clean the pistons from the top. At least that's what I'm noticing. So yeah, I put 4 ounces of this Marvel Mystery oil in each cylinder, through the top and the spark plug holes. Put this away already, but I'll show you. I use you can use whatever you want to measure it, but I use this because it's easy to pour out of. It's an old Techron Chevron bottle, but on the side there's a 4-ounce indicator. So that's how I measure the 4 ounces, and I put it in there. When I did a gum out, I only did 2 ounces, but this I do the 4 because Marvel Mystery is cheap, and why not? It's going to go down in the crankcase anyway and serve as an oil enhancer for the next couple thousand miles of this oil change interval. So I let it go down there, let it soak down. I actually, before I put it down there, I'll show you what I use. So I have this, it's a mirror you can use, like, look at, when you're working on the car, sometimes you can't see behind things. It's almost like a larger, like a dentist mirror that he uses to see your teeth or whatever, but that's what this thing is. But it's long too, and I use this as a measuring kind of tool. I just drop it right down through the spark plug hole, and I kind of would use this so that make sure all the pistons are the same height, proper height. Then I have a ruler, which it's down here. Ugh. And I measure how high they are there, and to get it the perfect height for this car, it's about a little under 1 3/4 inches from that spot right there. And then I just make sure that one of the middles and one of the outsides are the same. And that's how I know that the pistons are at the same height, because you don't want one piston like all the way up and another one all the way down, because you're not going to be able to, if one's all the way up, barely any oil or the Marvel Mistral oil is going to sit on top of the piston. So you want them even, to get them even. Okay, this is a it's like a kind of like a splash guard that's on the bottom of the car. I honestly think you could probably run without it, but I think the reason it exists is, before I took this out, you could see now, there's the belt, and you can see all the way down past the belt to the ground. That's the asphalt down there. Now, that wasn't there before when that guard was in. The guard went down here. I'll get under the car and show you. But the guard goes basically right here, and you wouldn't be able to see the any of the pulleys, the belt, or anything, because the guard goes right here. It attaches to the, here's my tire, the fender liner, that thing. You can see those holes. I got to reconnect it back when this whole process is done. I guess it actually does serve a big purpose, because it probably keeps the pulleys in good shape for a longer period of time, because you're not getting like water and stuff like that shot up here. So I took that out so that I could get, and the reason is that right there that I have the socket and the breaker bar connected to, that is the crankshaft pulley. And you actually put this on there and you can rotate it. You don't want to rotate it a lot. Now, take this off and I'll tell you what size it is for the Malibu. This thing, 15/16, so a little bit under an inch. A lot of sockets don't go that big. You might have to get like a special kind if yours only go to like 19 millimeters. I think 19 millimeters would be a little too small for this, so I went up to size larger. And what I tried to do was, when I got that on there, I wanted to see if I could get a spot where this thing could kind of go straight up and down my breaker bar. And I measured that this breaker bar, if I pulled it forward, would be slightly forward of that little indentation on the fender liner. And when it was, all the pistons were pretty much at the same height. And then the whole point of this is, like, you can use that to rotate the crankshaft. If you move a little bit, like, there's a little play in my breaker bar, so this is not doing anything right now. But once I reach the end of the play, I can move it a little bit like that. That's pushing some pistons up and down. This thing slips off a lot. So I shot it a tiny bit forward. I don't move much. So I'll put it back a little bit. I'll go back a little bit more. Not much. Like I said, I don't too much and make the pistons move too much. You don't have to move too much for these to really go. So I'm just trying to get the Marvel Mystery, because I already put my second dose in. Dug into those rings a little bit so it can clean them out a little better. Because if it's not reaching and getting moved around inside those piston rings, it's not going to get down to the oil control ring holes and really clean them. And that's the whole point of this, at least I think. So that's how I do this. I'm going to let this sit overnight. I've already been letting a lot of the first dose sit all day. Eventually most of that sucked all through into the crankcase. And that's why I just added more, maybe like a half hour ago. And that's why I just had to kind of jostle the crankshaft so that I could, you know, move the pistons up and down a little bit and get that Marvel Mystery oil in there and clean it. So that's kind of that. I'll let this sit overnight, and hopefully it frees up the oil control rings a little bit and I burn some less oil. Oh, another thing. Right now, I don't know if you can see it. I'll shake the car a little bit. Oh, you could see the Marvel Mystery oil down there. See it shaking and the light bouncing off of it. That's the oil down there. There it is there too. When you're done, if you still have more in there because it didn't all sink through and it's time for you to put all this back together, get your new spark plugs in there, or if you're reusing your spark plugs, get them in there with the anti-seize and all. You got to get that out, because if you leave that in there and you try to crank your engine, you're going to hydrolock it. You don't want to do that. So a good way to do that is, well, I'm going to let it sit overnight and hopefully it all drains into the crankcase. But if it doesn't, and what I'm going to do anyway, regardless if it looks like all of it's in there, you take a fuse out. So over here is the fuse box, and this fuse box is a little bit of a pain, but so see that fuse that's out? That goes actually right here, and I think it's actually number 67, I believe. Yeah, 67. And what I was looking for was like a fuel control module, something like that. And when you look at 67, it's called FC or FSCM, which doesn't tell you crap. So I had no idea that was a fuel module. So I went into, I probably could have Googled it, but I was in the car, so I just pulled out the owner's manual and went to fuses. And it told me that number 67 was the fuel control module, I believe. So I knew that was going to be controlling the fuel, and I didn't really want any fuel, spraying in here when I cranked it to get all the Marvel Mixture oil out, because I don't need, fuel just dumping into the cylinders that already has Marvel Mixture oil in there. So why would I want that dumping in there when I'm trying to crank it all out? So you could see here though that you have little splatters of crap all over. That's because before I put these new 4 ounces of Marvel Mystery in there about a half hour ago, I cranked it to get it all dry in there, as dry as I could, to get clean fluid in. And also was probably helping to jostle the rings and embed the rest of the Marvel Mystery in the rings, and maybe break the rings free, from being stuck or clogged or whatever. So yeah, I just think that's kind of important. Otherwise you're going to be spraying fuel that's obviously unburnt because the spark plugs aren't in there. You don't want that fuel just sitting in there on the pistons and then seeping through the crankcase. That's going to give you oil that's diluted with fuel, which is not what you want. So that's why I undid that fuel control module. So like I said, I'll probably jostle this one more time before I go to bed, and just let it sit overnight, and hopefully this has a chance to clean those piston rings, and then we'll go from there. Tomorrow I'll put everything back together, and then it'll probably smoke a lot because there's going to be some residual Marvel Mixture oil in there, and I'll let that all burn out, and hopefully this sucker will be cleaner. It'll have cleaner piston rings and it'll burn less oil. We'll see if that's the case. But yeah, I'll have to put that fuse back in. I'll let you know if the Marvel Mystery helped this car. I hope it did, because this was a decent amount of work today, and it would suck if this stuff didn't work, and if it would have worked had I used the gum out again. So we'll see. I'll update you in the description. Like and subscribe. See you, slobs.